I'll introduce Kim and we'll get into a chat about market research. So Kim is one of Articulous's senior project managers. She specialises in customer experience, stakeholder engagement, helping organisations adapt and innovate to understand their customer needs. Working alongside clients in both public and private sectors, Kim's experience in gathering and analysing qualitative and quantitative data has helped organisations create long-term goodwill and lasting relationships with their customers. Leading the research team for Articulous, who interviewed 59 stakeholders over 3 weeks, Kim's work will help NRMRQ better communicate its efforts in telling compelling stories about natural resource management in Queensland. G'day, Kim.
Hi.
Also joining us from Articulous is Luke. He's not jumping on the panel, but he is there in the background to answer any questions that Kim and I don't get to. I'm going to ask you a question that wasn't in the list of questions I gave you, because you haven't had that much exposure to natural resource management, and you've just, we've just heard from these 4 research projects, and what you were doing is interesting because you pretty much went out into the community to gather perceptions and understandings of natural resource management. What are you thinking about the whole research process now and how it related to the market research you did?
Yeah, look, we had some really interesting conversations, I have to say, and having listened to the other researchers and what they spoke to people about and what they found out about, the thing that surprised me the most, not having worked a lot in particularly natural resource management, was the benefits that people spoke about, such a wide range of benefits of this work. Queenslanders spoke about urban and rural settings, and they spoke about land and water, and also, economic benefits of this work, but also lifestyle and social benefits of this work. That to me tells me that this is really important work, and it goes way beyond what people may think natural resource management is.
So I should have taken a step back to start with. Can you start by telling us what market research actually is and why NGOs, not-for-profits such as ours might actually undertake research like this?
Yeah, so market research is one form of engagement that businesses like NGOs can do to better understand what their customers want and need. And there are a number of things that happen when you do market research. So one is that you can gain an awareness about who your customers are and what their values, needs, motivations and ideas might be. And they're things that we spoke to people about. Other things that you might find doing market research is that it allows you to communicate more effectively. So when you know who your customers are and what motivates them and why they are interested in what you do, then you can create more targeted messaging and ensure that you remain relevant to them. And another thing you can do with market research also is to test new initiatives. And this is something that we didn't do in this market research because we were really focused on understanding people's perceptions and ideas and on the ground work and things like that. But you can actually test new initiatives so that you can find out what customers think about some of the ideas before you actually implement them.
So were you, given that you've done market research for a bunch of organisations, NGOs, sectors, movements, were you surprised at any of the findings from the work you did with us?
Probably one of the surprising things about the work was that people want both online information, which isn't that surprising, but they still really want face-to-face information as well, particularly the site visits and the field trips, and that really practical on-the-ground side of it as well. So it wasn't one or the other, but it was definitely both really good online information, but also opportunities so they could meet people face-to-face and network. And I guess there's a realization after the last couple of years that networking is a lot harder online. And so people still really want to do that in person.
One of the things that we chatted about early on, and the steering committee, you guys and ladies made a decision, was to include in the stakeholder analysis people who have never been involved in NRM. So why is an audience group like this important?
Yeah, so every organisation or company has strong supporters, advocates, but they also have people who never engage. And we really wanted to find out why these people had not engaged with NRM. And so we were able to get information from them so that we can, as we say, bring them into the tent. So how can we, attract these people to be involved in NRM in a more formalised way? Because the people who had never engaged are not people who are not doing NRM work. There are people out there doing NRM work, but not engaged in a formal way.
Did you find out why they weren't actually engaged in a formal way?
Yes. So there were a number of reasons why people weren't engaged. And there were things like they didn't understand the governance of NRM and how they could be involved with their local regional NRM body. Or they found they didn't have enough information or a good enough understanding about the funding and how it was distributed. Or they felt there was, an overload of information, and it was, sometimes when people have too much information about something, they feel confused and overwhelmed and prefer just to do their own thing.
So you also, some of your audience groups spoke about the bureaucracy involved in NRM in Queensland. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I guess, there was a perception that there's quite a lot of bureaucracy surrounding NRM in Queensland. And people didn't understand the governance structure, so they weren't sure how to be involved. But also some people didn't understand the value of being involved. So they knew that they're a formalised structure. They knew about the formalised structures and they knew about the regional bodies. But either they didn't understand how they could be involved or they didn't see a value in being involved.
The questions just come through talking about these stakeholder groups, and you can see on the screen that Articulous also spoke to peak bodies and decision makers, as well as a range of customers, and we'll talk a little bit about those customer types later. But in here, you clearly tell us what each of these customer groups or stakeholder groups want. But Scott asks, did you get a sense of why they might want to be accessing that information?
Yeah, so people spoke about lots of different types of information in the research that we did, which was really interesting. And as you can see in that infographic, the types of information that different stakeholder types wanted to access was slightly different. I
was just zooming in on a couple. Yeah.
All right. So, peak bodies were interested in more educational tools, and, peak bodies wanted more technical information, and the same with decision makers. And customers did want technical information, but they wanted a lot more practical information because of the nature of their involvement with NRM.
So when we look at customer profiles across this whole, all of these audience groups, were there any trends that you found across all of them?
Yes. There were trends across all of them. And I guess, the biggest trend I've probably already spoken about was that, combination of accessing information online and face-to-face. And probably would have expected to hear that face-to-face was more important for customers than for peak bodies and decision makers. But as you can see in the infographic, it was across all of the stakeholders. Everybody wants a mix of both.
So you investigated also some of the barriers for people being engaged in NRM. Can you tell me about some of those barriers for other audience groups?
Yes, I've already mentioned the barriers of, not understanding or valuing the governance structure and the information overload. But some of the other barriers that people spoke about was the funding and the distribution of funding. So people were unclear about how to access funding. That might be the grants process or the amount available, or restrictions on who can apply and how it's distributed. And the general consensus was that more funding was needed to support on-the-ground change. Another barrier that people found was cohesion. So they were unclear about how NRM bodies work together. And this was particularly important for large landholders who were involved with multiple regions, or when multiple regions are working on similar projects. So stakeholders actually identified opportunities for collaboration between the regions. Role was also a barrier to be involved. People were unclear about the role of NRM, particularly from government, about the work of NRM and local issues, and this played into the theme of funding and support as well. And I've already mentioned information overload, but there was definitely a strong need identified for an integrated and unified knowledge base when it comes to NRM.
I just wanted to remind people that when we talk about customers, we are including land managers and farmers in that group as well. So Articulous broke down our customers into 3 different types of customers. So we had on ground, which includes farmers, graziers, land managers, landholders. We had community, which are the community groups and the broader community society that we interact with. And then also experts, which includes technical experts, scientists, researchers, local government, people that understand and work in that NRM space. So you broke them down into these categories. And then you looked at each of their needs in terms of what information they need and how they might access it. Can you speak a little bit about the lessons we might take away from this?
Yeah, so I guess with NRM, there are a lot of different types of information that people are interested in, as you can see there. Definitely grants are a priority for people, but also understanding upcoming projects and events were also a priority. And then the more technical information around land management practices. And people, the biggest takeaway, I suppose, is that people want easy to understand information. A lot of these people, like everybody, is time poor, but they are really interested in information. And probably the other thing is that people want to know that the information they're accessing is from a trusted source. So some stakeholders spoke about the fact there is conflicting information out there. And they would like to know how to determine, which information they should be using.
Sorry, I was muted. That's another one I can add to the muted list, Pamela. There were crossovers and differences, and in the larger report, because of course the larger report was a bit bigger than this, there were some interesting comments around information overload, and then some people feeling that they're not even getting the correct information as well. The goal of this research was to gather insights that will help us tell a more compelling story about NRM in Queensland. So as an observer to most of the 50 or more conversations that took place, what do you think are the number one takeaway messages for us?
So the most important thing is to know who you are and what you want to do. So from talking to people on the ground, we spoke to people who had office jobs, but also people working on the land. And there was a united view that NRM is critical to the future prosperity of Queensland. And what this research showed was that NRM needs to bang its own drum more. And that can be an uncomfortable thing to do, especially when you have limited resources. But the focus is rightly on doing the work that matters. So to be able to do the work that matters, people need to have confidence that you can do it, and they need to know what you have done and why it matters. And as one of the stakeholders said, I can't champion NRM if I don't know what I'm championing. Other organisations of lesser capacity continually bang on my door to let me know their every move.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because in the same kind of research, we find that people are struggling from information overload, and then other people are saying they don't know where they should go for information. Which drives home the fact, and this is somewhere in here enough, in the decision makers column, actually, one of your, the people that you spoke to said, I can't stress enough how important it is to speak to your audience. We get so much information coming through that unless it is particularly relevant to what we are doing, we just don't have time to consider it. If there was one thing that regional NRM bodies did differently as a result of this research or improved, what should it be?
So one of our recommendations in our report, of which there were quite a few recommendations, but I think the most important one, and other researchers have touched on this as well this morning, is to really celebrate your success, no matter how big or small. It may seem like a small achievement to you, but it might be of huge interest to someone else. And when you are celebrating your success, remember who you were talking to and why they would be interested in knowing about it. Because there is a real opportunity to position NRM success stories in a broader context of flow-on effects for relevant target audiences and ultimately all Queenslanders. And those flow-on effects, which I've mentioned already, might include lifestyle, economic, obviously environmental, and also social benefits of NRM projects. And this could also inspire more landowners to make changes to their land management practices.
So when we had a bit of a run through of this, you shared some personal reflections about, this whole process and what you now understand about NRM. We've got a reminder to people too to pop any questions you have in the chat. But can you share some of those reflections with us, Kim? Personal reflections?
Yeah, look, the people I spoke to, some people are doing really incredible work. And as other researchers this morning have mentioned, some of this work takes a really long time. I spoke to some people who have been spending a lot of time and effort on weed management. And I'm sure that you're all aware of these kinds of things, but on a day-to-day basis, I don't speak to people doing that kind of work. So I found that to be quite interesting. But then, some landholders that we spoke to were also critical of other people nearby, their neighbours, who might not be doing this kind of work, and they, felt that was detrimental to what they were doing. So, there's some very interesting views out there.
There's a comment in the chat here from Penny, who's supporting with some facilitation today, and she says, it's equally important to make sure regional NRM bodies are acknowledging, celebrating and promoting the contribution of partners in the community and avoiding taking credit for the achievements of others. And Chris has a question. He asks if you can please expand on the comment that government is confused by NRM. Are there any particular areas of government here? Did they understand our sector's role? Where do you think the confusion's coming from?
Some of the decision makers we spoke to were very supportive of NRM, and they understood, that the benefits of doing NRM were wide ranging for all the reasons that I've already spoke about. But I guess the confusion comes in where there may be different departments doing similar things, or perhaps not enough collaboration between departments. That's, collaboration is something I haven't mentioned, but it definitely came through quite strongly in the research. And that was collaboration between regional bodies, but also between, government departments. So there was an acknowledgement that collaboration is definitely an opportunity in the NRM sector.
This isn't a question in the chat, but as a communication practitioner myself, if you were a communication officer sitting at a desk in one of the regions, and it's your job basically to take your findings and, change the way they do work, how would you go about that?
Well, one of the things our research showed was that there are lots of different target audiences, and there's a real opportunity to look at some of those, I suppose, target audiences that may not already be on your radar, and look at how you can engage with them and get them involved. We have people speak to us about, how much they love going out and enjoying national parks and natural environments, and people from the, escaping the city and going into these natural environments. And of course, they wouldn't get to enjoy those environments if it wasn't for, natural resource management. So, people are making that connection, but I think there's a real opportunity to encourage more people to make that connection, but then also to get involved in the improvement of those areas that they enjoy.
There's another question in the chat from Paul McDonald. We find that there is a dichotomy between managing landholder expectations and the here and now versus the role we have to help people understand, embrace and adapt to the future, which is becoming clearer. Did the research help us deal with this confusion?
I got a sense from the landholders that we spoke to that there is a desire to do things differently for the future, that there is a lot of information out there about more progressive land management practices, but there is also challenges associated with that. A few people actually mentioned the phrase to me, which I honestly never heard before, and it was like, change happens one funeral at a time. There's definitely a desire for younger generations to do things differently, but they feel they have to wait until, that they are leading that cause. And that was something that was also unexpected.